Good morning to everybody. We're very happy that you're all joining this POPRC and showing so much interest in the intersessional work of the POPRC. My name is Andrea Vamos, and I work as an Associate Program Officer for the Secretariat of the Basel, Rotterdam, and Stockholm Conventions. I'm mainly supporting the work of the Conference of the Parties and the subsidiary bodies of the Basel, Rotterdam, and Stockholm Conventions, including the POPs Review Committee. During this presentation, I will be introducing the Persistent Organic Pollutants Review Committee, which we call, according to its acronym, POPRC, and also mention the intersessional work that is currently going on and how parties and observers can participate in this intersessional work. The POPs Review Committee is a subsidiary body of the Stockholm Convention, which was established by the Conference of the Parties as the subsidiary body mandated to review chemicals proposed for inclusion in the Convention. When the Stockholm Convention entered into force in 2004, 12 chemicals were covered under the Convention. But the possibility to add more chemicals in the Convention was added, and these chemicals need to be screened. The screening process is carried out by the POPs Review Committee. The POPRC has screened a number of chemicals since the entry into force of the Convention, and proposed to the Conference of the Party to consider listing 10 additional substances under the Convention. The Conference of the Party has considered these recommendations and decided to list those additional chemicals. We thus nowadays already have 22 POPs in the Convention. Lately, the Conference of the Parties has also asked the POPs Review Committee to deal with other scientific issues and provide advice on these. For example, the POPRC is currently working on alternatives to POPs, on toxicological interactions, on the effects of climate change on POPs, etc. The committee is composed of 31 experts, which are nominated by the government and appointed by the Conference of the Parties. The meetings are also open to observers, who are most welcome to participate and contribute information. The meeting of the POPs Review Committee takes place once a year, and the next meeting will take place from 15th to 19th October 2012 in Geneva. On the current slide, you can see the past and current members of the POPRC. In 2012, we're having a rotation of membership, and it's actually taking place in May. And starting from May, the countries in the last two columns will be members of the POPs Review Committee. We will be sending you this presentation later on so that you can have a detailed look if you're interested. A significant part of the work of the committee takes place intersessionally, in particular the preparation of documents. During the meetings, the POPRC adopts decisions related to intersessional works and also approves work plans for the intersessional period. The report of the last meeting, document POPRC 7/19, contains the work plans for the current intersessional period. The work is then usually carried out by intersessional working groups that are also called ad hoc working groups, and the outputs of the work are considered by the next meeting of the review committee. The work usually starts with an invitation by the committee to parties and observers to provide information. The Secretariat sends out a letter after the meeting inviting parties and observers to submit information, and when it receives information, it forwards it to this intersessional working group. The requests for information, as well as the submissions, are posted on the POPRC website. It is very important to highlight the importance of the participation of parties and observers in this process. The information doesn't only help to enhance the quality of the document and thus of the decision-making of the POPRC, but parties and observers can also contribute to bringing the situation in countries to the attention of the committee. The committee will later on make recommendations on possible control measures, on exemptions, and it's thus very important that they know about the situation in the countries. And it's thus very much also in the interest of parties and observers to submit information to the committee. Parties and observers are invited to check national and other sources, registers, databases, collaborate with relevant ministries, the private sector, research institutions, NGOs, etc., to gather information and submit it to the POPRC. If you need any guidance on how to collect this information, the review committee has actually developed these in the so-called Handbook for Effective Participation in the POPRC and the Pocket Guide, and it actually contains a methodology of how to collect information. These documents will be shared with you after the session. On the current screen, you can now see the information requests that were made by the POPRC after the last meeting in 9 different areas. These information requests were sent out in a letter by the Secretariat in December 2011. For some of these requests, the deadline is still open. Those would be the guidance on alternatives to perfluorooctane sulfonate, the information on brominated diphenyl ethers and perfluorooctane sulfonic acid, as well as information on transformation of pentachlorophenol to pentachloroanisole. For these other areas, the deadline is actually already over. However, you're still invited anytime to submit information, in particular still on hexabromocyclododecane, because the information can be used later on in the process. For example, the information could also be brought to the next meeting of the review committee and discussed there. Our 2 experts will later on talk more in detail about the work that are currently carried out by the intersessional working group. Once initial information has been collected, drafters and chairs prepare first drafts of the document. Those drafts are then sent to parties and observers for comment. The invitations for comment, as well as the submissions, are also available on the POPRC website. The intersessional working groups will then take the comments into account, revise the documents, and send them as the final product to the next POPRC meeting for discussion. In summary, there are thus 2 opportunities for parties and observers to contribute to the work of the POPRC intersessional. On this slide, you can see the documents that will be sent to you during this current intersessional period for comment. 2 of these, the draft risk profile on chlorinated naphthalene and the draft risk profile on hexachlorobutadiene, have already been sent out to parties and observers for comment. Comments need to be submitted to the Secretariat before the 26th of May 2012. The other invitations that you see on the screen will be sent out shortly during the months of April and May, so you can already be looking forward to receiving those draft documents for comment. Thank you very much for your attention, and as I mentioned before, the experts will now talk in more detail about the work of the intersessional working groups. If you have any questions in the POPRC, you can always contact us at ssc@popsci.nc and follow the POPRC activities on the POPRC website. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the presentation, Andrea. And our next presenter is Mr. Timo Sepala. So Timo, I'll pass the ball to you.
Thank you.
And you'll have the full control over your presentation.
Thank you, and good morning, everybody, or good afternoon, or evening, or night. My name is Timo Seppälä. I work for the Finnish Environment Institute, and I've been a member of POPRC for 2 years now, since 2010. And I will briefly introduce the state of play with regards to the hexabromocyclododecane. So the objective is to provide you with information on the activities that POPRC has had on HBCD, and especially on the most recent development at the 7th meeting of the POPRC, which was in last October, and what we have received after this call for new information, which the POPRC considered that was necessary to have. And just to bring you up to date on the hexabromocyclododecane, it is a flame retardant, an additive flame retardant, which is used mostly for insulation and construction, insulation materials in construction, precisely for expanded and extruded polystyrene foams. There are 2 main other uses, so I don't know if you can say main, because these are really considered a lot smaller than the use for EPS and XPS, and these are the high impact polystyrene in electric and electronic appliances, and the back coating for certain textiles, which are used in transportation and public buildings mostly. According to the information that the POPRC collected for the risk management evaluation, which was adopted at the last meeting in October, the annual consumption of HVCD globally is in the neighborhood of 28,000 tons per year, and mostly it is being used in Europe and China. And as I mentioned, it's more than 90, perhaps 95% that appears to be used for EPS and XPS, and the use in high impact polystyrene and textiles is really a lot smaller. Like we are talking about a few percentages. The HVCD was originally proposed by Norway to be included in the Stockholm Convention, and at the 5th meeting, the POPRC reviewed this proposal by Norway against the Annex D criteria of the convention and decided that HVCD met these screening criteria. And consequently, there was this intersessional working group that was set up, chaired by Peter Dawson from New Zealand, a POPRC member, and myself as a drafter. And actually, before me, the drafter was Ms. Maria Delvin from Sweden. Anyway, this is the group that started developing the risk profile according to the Annex E criteria. There were 3 commenting rounds in the preparation of this risk profile, and it was really thoroughly scrutinized by parties, observers, and the industry. And there was a lot of interest in this substance, as it is very commonly used flame retardant, as you can judge based on the 28,000 ton production annual. In 2010, the POPRC adopted this risk profile, and the same working group continued to prepare risk management evaluation according to the Annex F. There were also 3 commenting rounds, and parties and observers and the industry commented this risk management evaluation very extensively. At the last meeting in October, the POPRC adopted this risk management evaluation according to the Annex F, and the outcome is really summarized here. That since the POPRC concluded that it was necessary to propose inclusion of this, to propose to the conference of the parties of inclusion of this substance to the annexes of the convention, there is the question of phasing out or restricting it. And basically, there are 2 approaches to deal with replacing HVCD. First of all, you can look at the materials where HVCD is being used and replace those materials with other materials where HVCD is not necessary. And I think it's important to mention that the POPRC paid a lot of attention to the fact that if you start replacing materials, you still shouldn't compromise the fire safety in this process. The second option is, of course, to replace HVCD with some other flame retardant, which we call a drop-in alternative. And the conclusion of the risk management evaluation was that there were several alternative materials on the market, and already they were being used instead of those materials where HVCD was needed. However, it was also noted that some of these, the use of some of these materials may require different approaches to building constructions, as well as the changes in the national requirements for fire safety. And this has been discussed extensively in the risk management evaluation, as well as in some of the reports that have become available in the last 6 months. The conclusion was that there were already alternative flame retardants as well for uses in high-impact polystyrene and textile back coatings. However, there was not easy replacement for HBCD in EPS and XPS, which are the dominant uses of HBCD. So, as the outcome of the last meeting, the POPRC invited an ad hoc working group to collect additional information on HBCD. And I think it's important to also mention here that POPRC also recommended to the COP to list HBCD in the conference of the parties. However, it considered necessary that it might be useful to collect new information, because a lot is happening with regards to drop-in alternatives of HBCD and also with regards to other developments in construction. And the intention of the POPRC is based on this additional information to see at the next meeting, which is going to be in the October this year, whether the listing recommendation could be specified with regards to the recommendation of a certain annex or even certain exemptions. And the information collection was specifically targeted on chemical alternatives. As I mentioned, that there were already alternative materials for many of these uses, but it was also considered necessary that it would be important to know whether HBCD as a flame retardant can be replaced by some other flame retardant in these certain uses, the major uses of EPS and XPS. And it was also anticipated that because, as I mentioned, that there was a lot of happening with this regard, it was also expected that new information would become available. And to date, we have received 17 submissions, 13 from the parties and 4 from observers. And I will just, before I conclude, I will just briefly go through the contents of these chemicals. First of all, there was a new chemical alternative or product for EPS and XPS application that we received information on that we didn't know in the past. It is an HBCD-free but still a brominated flame retardant mixture that has been developed for EPS and XPS. We don't know very much about this yet, but this information will be clarified later this year, and we hope to be having more detailed information on this during the next few months. In addition, there was new information on the availability, costs, and performance of this alternative that we already were aware of last year, Emerald 3000, which seems to be a drop-in alternative to HBCD. And the conclusion based on this is that it appears that there are no significant impact on costs, and the production is being scaled up currently so that this would become an available alternative to HBCD. And it seems that the sufficient amounts would be available within the next 3 to 5 years. And there was also some new information on HBCD use in XPS in North America, as well as also new information on amounts of use and production in China that we received. So that concludes my presentation, and this is just to remind you that you still have a possibility to submit information if you have any on the alternatives to the convention secretariat, and we are in the process of compiling this information into a report that will be made available for comments later in the summer and completed for the POPRC in October. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Timo. I'll now take back the ball. So now we have the last expert presentation, which will be done by Ms. Svetlana Skorebra. So, Svetlana, I'll now pass the ball to you. Your slide is on.
Thank you very much.
Now the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good morning to everybody. Let me start my presentation and at first introduce myself to you. My name is Svetlana Sukharebra. I am an expert and a senior scientist at the National Academy of Sciences of Ukraine. Since May of the year 2010, I became a member of the Persistent Organic Pollutants Review Committee of the Stockholm Convention, and last year was designated as the chair of the intersessional working group on chlorinated naphthalines. My today's presentation will focus on a brief overview of the process of listing new chemicals in the convention, as well as the POPRC activities aimed at reviewing candidate POPs and the significant role of parties and observers in its intersessional work. Well, as you might know, the process of listing new chemicals into the convention is specified in Article 8. The overall procedure consists in few main steps, and the initial step foresees submission of the corresponding proposal, which must contain the information specified in Annex D of the convention. Any party may submit such proposal, and on a preparatory stage may be assisted by other parties and or by the Secretariat. It would be essential to mention that the proposing party should, taking into account its capacity, provide for the committee to review the proposal. And it's very important to provide relevant scientific quality. It means that the scientific data from peer-reviewed journals has the highest priority. The cited information should be publicly available, but gray literature or peer-reviewed assessments based on primary scientific data produced by national, regional, or international organizations may also be used. The proposal should be submitted at least 5 months in advance of the meeting at which it's to be discussed. After the Secretariat verification whether the proposal contains all information specified in Annex D, it's forwarded to the committee. Then, if the committee decides that the screening criteria have been fulfilled, the Secretariat makes the proposal and the evaluation of the committee available to all parties and observers. From this point on, all parties and observers are invited to contribute with the information specified in Annex DE of the Convention to prepare a draft risk profile and the proposed chemical, and then, when approved with the information specified, to develop a draft document. Well, the final version which discussed and adopted by the committee should contain a summary with description of the possible control measures that were analyzed and the proposed recommendation on listing the chemical in annexes to the convention. This recommendation is distributed for consideration by all parties, and the conference of the parties makes its decision whether to list the chemical into the convention, as well as specifies its related control measures. Now let me back to the candidate POPs being under review by the committee. Tim already has made the description of the state of the art on hexabromocyclododecan, and in addition to it, we have 4 other chemicals, or the groups proposed by the European Union. They are short-chain chlorinated paraffins, chlorinated naphthalines, hexachlorobutadiene, and pentachlorophenol with its derivatives. The corresponding proposals and the additional relevant information can be found in the shown documents, which are placed on the convention official website. And now, I will provide you with a summary on each of these chemicals in more details. Evaluation of short-chain chlorinated paraffin started in 2006 at the second POPRC meeting, The committee considered the proposal submitted by the European Union and decided that the screening criteria for SCCPs were fulfilled. The made proposal represents the commercial SCCP product that is produced by the chlorination of a single hydrocarbon fraction consisting of an alkanes that have a carbon chain length distribution consisting of 10, 11, 12, and 13 carbon atoms. This nomination for listing is directed at SCCP's products that contain more than 48% by weight chlorination. The initial draft risk profile for SCCPs was developed and represented by the intersessional working group at the third POPRC meeting, but consensus wasn't reached on its adoption. Since then, till the last POPRC meeting, profile and the additional information submitted by parties and observers, but was unable to take a decision because of uncertainties in applying the criteria specified in Annex E to the Stockholm Convention. It was set out a proposal on the next steps. In particular, that the risk profile should include scenarios relating to interactions between short change and medium change chlorinated paraffins through exposure in remote areas. Additional information would also be thought to clarify the bioconcentration, bioaccumulation, and biomagnification factors to confirm the extent to which different SCCPs might meet the Annex E criteria. Therefore, at its seventh meeting, the committee considered the outcome of the case study on toxicological interactions of chlorinated paraffins and agreed to establish an ad hoc working group to undertake the following activities: to revise the relevant parts of the draft risk profile to incorporate information on toxicological interactions of chlorinated paraffins for consideration by the committee at its eighth meeting, and to compile issues and principles to be applied in the interpretation of the Annex E criteria for consideration by the committee also at its eighth meeting. Chlorinated naphthalines and hexachlorobutadiene are newly proposed chemicals, and the committee at its last meeting examined both dossiers in accordance with the screening criteria specified in Annex D to the Convention. It was noted that the term chlorinated naphthalines encompasses a group of substances, in other words, as many as 75 chlorinated naphthalines containing from 1 to 8 chlorine atoms. These chemicals can be commercially produced as mixtures of several combiners. Besides, they can be found in different media as a result of their unintentional production, mainly in thermal processes. Hexachlorobutadiene is known generated as a byproduct in the manufacturing of chlorinated hydrocarbons and used in different applications. Besides, it still can be unintentionally released by industry. At the POPRC 7, the decision was made that the screening criteria were fulfilled for both hexachlorobutadiene and polychlorinated naphthalines, excluding monochlorobutadiene, and two separate intersessional working groups were established to prepare draft risk profiles in accordance with Annex E of the Convention. It's evident that these documents should be based on the information provided by parties and observers and considered at the 8th POPRC meeting this year. In this connection, I would mention again the forms to be filled in and their explanatory notes are available on the Convention's website. All parties were provided with these forms together with the letter of invitation for information submission, and the requested information should be submitted to the Secretariat by the official contact point or the national focal point of the Convention. It's essential to notice that all information should be duly referenced and reliably enough to support its validity. The respective information may exist in different databases, and you might need to select, analyze, or update information in order to make it accessible. There are 3 rounds of comment periods while developing the draft risk profiles. The first and the third draft are circulated among the working group members, while the second draft is made available for public review. The established intersessional working groups on chlorinated naphthalines and hexachlorobutadiene already finalized the second draft documents, which were distributed for comment by parties and observers. It's expected that such comments will be received by the 25th of May, and after their review by the corresponding working groups, the final draft risk profiles will be prepared. If the committee will decide that the proposals should proceed, its decision together with the adopted risk profiles will be communicated to all parties and observers with the request to submit information as specified in Annex E of the Convention to prepare draft risk management evaluation. If the committee will decide that the proposal shall not proceed, the risk profiles will be made available to parties and observers, and the proposals will be set aside. And finally, that is a brief overview of pentachlorophenol evaluation. At its 7th meeting, the committee examined the proposal made by the European Union to list it into the annexes to the convention. And it was made an evaluation that was based on the provided information, which also included the data on pentachloroanisole, that is a transformation product and a precursor of pentachlorophenol. After applying the screening criteria set out in Annex D to the convention, the committee considered that pentachlorophenol alone did not meet this criteria, but that its metabolite pentachloroanisole did. There was disagreement, however, as to whether the 2 chemicals should be jointly considered and moved to the Annex E evaluation stage, since pentachlorophenol couldn't be verified as the sole source of pentachloroanisole in the environment, and there was uncertainty regarding the extent of transformation from pentachlorophenol and other possible precursors to pentachloroanisole and from the latter to pentachlorophenol. It was made the decision to continue evaluation of the proposal and establish an intersessional working group which should prepare materials to be considered at the forthcoming 8th POPRC meeting, namely on fate and transport of pentachlorophenol and pentachloroanisole, as well as transformation of pentachlorophenol to this metabolite. Besides, at the POPRC 7, it was prepared a summary of the available information on transformation of pentachlorophenol to pentachloroanisole in different environmental and experimental conditions, and were indicated some informational gaps to be filled during POPRC intersessional work. As a result, the interested parties are invited to initiate experiments under conditions relevant to the environment, and to collect monitoring data on pentachlorophenol and pentachloroanisole, in particular from pentachlorophenol contaminated sites, as such data could provide information on what happens in the environment under actual conditions. In addition, it was also stated that such experiments and compilation of monitoring data should be initiated without delay, so that they can be taken into account by the committee at its nearest meeting. In conclusion of my presentation, I would again focus your attention on the availability of all relevant information related to candidate POPs on the Convention's website. In particular, all submissions from parties and observers, POPRC decisions and meeting reports. All committee members and Secretariat encourage you and your colleagues to make your possible contributions that would facilitate development of POPRC, sound decisions, and recommendations to the Conference of the Parties. Thank you for your attention.